Welcome to Verified Fears. The Olympic Peninsula is 329 miles of rainforest, mountain peaks, and coastline where the Pacific wind carries something older than memory, and travelers still disappear on roads that were supposed to be safe. Tonight, you're driving the entire loop, with 11 encounters that happened on stretches of Highway 101 where cell service dies. Fog rolls in without warning, and the forest decides whether you're leaving or staying. These aren't tales whispered around campfires. These are the moments that made people pull over, call someone they trusted, and ask if what they saw was possible. Because the peninsula has rules that don't match the rest of the world, and breaking them means becoming part of the landscape. Stay through all 11 stops on this drive, and when you reach the end, drop a comment with the exact location that made you check your rearview mirror. Mile marker 223, Hurricane Ridge, the Tree of Life. Whichever one reminded you that some roads remember every driver who thought they were just passing through, because proving you made it to the final story means you're the kind of person who doesn't look away when the headlights catch something that shouldn't be standing there. You ever pull off a highway in the middle of the night and feel like you've stepped outside of time? That's what mile marker 223 felt like the first time I saw it. Just a plain concrete rest stop between Port Angeles and Lake Crescent. Nothing special. The kind of place you'd forget 5 minutes after leaving. Except, I didn't forget it. None of us who stopped there between midnight and 3 in the morning ever forgot it. Because that rest stop doesn't follow the same rules as the rest of Highway 101, and by the time you realize something's wrong, you're already inside. It was 2:17 in the morning when I pulled in. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight, delivering medical supplies up to Port Angeles, and my bladder was screaming. The parking lot was empty, completely empty. Which felt strange because I could have sworn I'd seen at least 3 or 4 cars ahead of me on the road. But fatigue makes you see things, right? Makes you imagine traffic that isn't there. So I parked under one of those buzzing fluorescent lights, the kind that flickers just enough to make you uncomfortable, and I walked toward the bathroom entrance. The cold hit me first. It was July, middle of summer, and I'd been driving with the windows cracked because the night air felt warm and alive. But the moment I stepped under that concrete overhang, the temperature dropped like I'd walked into a freezer. My breath came out in visible clouds. I could see it hanging in the air under those fluorescent lights. And I remember thinking that was impossible. That something was broken with the ventilation system, or maybe there was some weird microclimate thing happening with the lake nearby. I didn't turn around. I should have turned around. The bathroom door was heavy, heavier than it should have been, and it made this deep, grinding sound when I pushed it open, like metal on stone. Inside, the lights were the same flickering fluorescence, but they were casting shadows that didn't quite match the fixtures. You know how sometimes a shadow falls in the wrong direction and your brain just accepts it? This wasn't like that. These shadows were moving on their own, just slightly, like they were breathing. I stood there at the door for maybe 10 seconds, watching those shadows pulse against the tile walls, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. But I really had to go. Isn't that stupid? Isn't that the most human thing? Your body's lizard brain is throwing every alarm it has, and you ignore it because you need to use the bathroom. So I walked in. The graffiti stopped me cold. It was everywhere. Carved into the stall doors, scratched into the mirrors, even etched into the floor tiles. But it wasn't the usual crude drawings or phone numbers or song lyrics. These were dates, just dates, hundreds of them. And they were wrong. I saw 2031, 2034, 2020, 2042. Years that haven't happened yet. Carved deep into the paint and metal like whoever did it had all the time in the world. My hands were shaking when I pulled out my phone to take a picture. But the screen was dead. Completely black. And I'd had a full charge when I parked. That's when I heard the hand dryer. One of those automatic ones that kicks on when you put your hands under it. It was running in the far stall, the one with the door hanging crooked on its hinges. Running and running and running. That hollow roar echoing off the tiles. But nobody was in there. I could see under the gap at the bottom of the door. No feet, no shadow. Just that dryer going like someone was standing right in front of it. I backed toward the exit. And that's when I caught my reflection in the mirror above the sinks. Except it wasn't quite my reflection. It was me, but older. Maybe 10, 15 years older. Deeper lines around the eyes, gray at the temples. The same jacket, the same expression of absolute terror, but aged. And my reflection wasn't moving the same way I was. It was delayed, just by a second, like there was lag between me and the glass. I watched myself in that mirror, and I watched my reflection mouth something I hadn't said yet. Get out. I ran. I slammed through that bathroom door so hard I thought I'd break it off its hinges, and I sprinted across the parking lot toward my truck. But when I got there, something was wrong. There was dust on the hood. Thick dust, the kind that accumulates over months, not minutes. My inspection sticker in the windshield was different. The date said it had expired 2 years ago. And there were things in my truck bed that I'd never seen before. A spare tire that wasn't mine, a toolbox I didn't recognize, a faded parking permit from a hospital I'd never been to. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It shouldn't have worked. It was dead in the bathroom. But now it was lighting up with notifications, dozens of them. All downloading at once like it had been out of service for a long time. Text messages from my sister asking where I'd been, voicemails from my dispatch asking why I'd missed my routes, emails marked months old. And at the top of the screen, the date, July 18th. I'd entered that rest stop on July 16th. I lost 2 days in that bathroom. 2 days that I don't remember, that didn't exist for me, that happened outside of my body somehow. I drove straight to Port Angeles, delivered my supplies 3 days late, and told dispatch I'd had engine trouble. What else could I say? That I'd fallen through a crack in time at a rest stop that might not even exist? I've driven Highway 101 maybe 30 times since then. I've never seen mile marker 223 again. I've looked for it, counted the markers as I pass, watched my GPS, even tried to match the spot using landmarks. But that rest stop isn't there anymore. Or maybe it's never there when you're looking for it. Maybe it only appears when you're tired enough, distracted enough, desperate enough, that you'll pull over without questioning why the parking lot is empty or why the air is so cold in the middle of summer. But here's what keeps me awake sometimes. What makes me grip the steering wheel a little tighter when I'm driving alone at night. Those dates carved into the bathroom walls. They were all in the future when I saw them. But time keeps moving forward, doesn't it? And some of those dates are in the past now. 2029 already happened. 2031 is just 6 years away, which means someone carved them while they were visiting their own future or maybe their own past. Because that rest stop doesn't care which direction you're traveling through time. It only cares that you stop, that you get out of your vehicle, that you walk through that door. And once you do, it decides when you leave. Not you. Never you. There's a photograph on my phone that I can't delete. I've tried maybe 100 times, Selected it, hit the trash icon, confirm deletion, but every time I open my gallery, it's back. And I need you to understand something. I never wanted to take that photograph. I didn't even know I was taking it. But Lake Crescent decided I needed a souvenir from the day I met Hallie Illingworth. And when a glacial lake that's been collecting bodies for over a century decides you're taking something home, you don't really get a choice. It was July 6th. I know that matters because later, when I was shaking so hard I could barely hold a coffee cup, the ranger told me that's the anniversary. That's the day Hallie's husband wrapped her body in blankets and dumped her in the lake back in 1937, thinking the cold water would hide her forever. He was almost right. She stayed down there for 3 years, turning into what they call a soap mummy, where the body fat converts into this waxy substance in the mineral-rich water, preserving everything like a terrible photograph that never fades. When she finally surfaced in 1940, witnesses said she looked almost alive, just sleeping, just waiting. I didn't know any of this when I drove out to Devil's Punch Bowl that morning. I just wanted to swim somewhere beautiful, somewhere that felt ancient and clean, away from the crowds at the main beach. The Punch Bowl is this natural swimming hole carved into the rock along the Spruce Railroad Trail. And the water there is so blue, it doesn't look real. Like someone dumped paint into it, this impossible glacial color that hurts to look at. I had the place completely to myself. Should have been perfect. The water was cold. I mean, I expected cold. But this was different. This was the kind of cold that makes your lungs seize up, that makes your thoughts scatter. I waded in up to my knees. And I remember thinking the bottom dropped away too fast, that the depth wasn't natural. 1 step and you're knee-deep. 2 steps and you can't touch anymore. But I'm a strong swimmer, always have been. So I pushed off and dove under. That's when I felt it. Not saw it. Felt it. Like someone had grabbed my ankle, but soft, almost gentle, like fingers made of silk or wet fabric. I kicked hard, broke the surface, spun around expecting to see another swimmer, maybe someone playing a prank. Nothing. Just that blue water and the rock walls and the trees overhead. My heart was hammering, but I laughed it off. Lakeweed, I thought. Just got tangled in lakeweed. Except Lake Crescent doesn't have lakeweed. The water's too cold, too mineral-rich. Nothing grows down there except the things that sink and don't come back up. I was about to get out when I saw her. Standing on the rocks about 20 feet away, right where I'd left my towel and my phone. A woman in a dark dress, completely soaked, hair hanging down over her face in thick, wet ropes. She wasn't moving. Just standing there, dripping like she'd just climbed out of the water. And I hadn't heard a splash, hadn't heard anything. I called out, asked if she was okay, if she needed help. She didn't answer, didn't move. The wind picked up. I remember that specifically because it was the first time I'd felt wind since I'd arrived, like the air had been holding its breath and finally let go. And when that wind blew, it moved her hair just enough that I could see what was underneath. Her face was gray. Not pale, not blue from cold. Gray like old meat, like something that had been underwater for a very long time. And her eyes were open, but they were wrong, filmed over with this white cloudiness that made them look like they were full of lake water. She was looking right at me. Not through me, not past me. Right at me. I've never swum so fast in my life. I thrashed toward the rocks, my arms burning, my breath coming in gasps. And the whole time I could feel that soft pressure on my ankle again, like something was pacing me under the water, matching my speed, staying right below me. When I hauled myself onto the rocks, my ankle was burning. I looked down, and there was a mark. Not a cut, not a scrape, but a handprint. Perfect fingers, perfect palm. Pressed into my skin like a bruise, except it was cold to the touch. Cold enough that I could feel it radiating up my leg. The woman was gone. My towel was exactly where I'd left it. My phone was there too, screen facing up, and that's when I saw it had taken a photo. The camera app was open, timestamp showing 10:47 a.m., right when I'd been in the water. I didn't take that photo. My phone was on the rocks. But when I looked at the image, my blood went cold enough to match that handprint on my ankle. It was a shot of the water. The blue, beautiful water of Devil's Punch Bowl. And there, just below the surface, close enough to touch, was a face. Gray skin, white eyes, mouth slightly open, hair floating around her head like dark seaweed. She was right underneath where I'd been swimming. Right there. Looking up at me through 6 feet of glacial water with an expression that wasn't quite sad and wasn't quite angry, but was definitely, absolutely aware. I ran, left my towel, grabbed my phone, and ran back down the Spruce Railroad Trail so fast I thought my heart would explode. I didn't stop until I reached my car, and I sat there shaking for 20 minutes before I could even put the key in the ignition. That's when I tried to delete the photo. And that's when I realized it wouldn't go away. I've tried everything. Factory reset, different phones, cloud storage purges. The photo always comes back. And every time I look at it, and I do look, I can't help myself. She's a little bit closer to the surface, a little bit clearer. In the original shot, she was blurry, indistinct. Now I can see individual strands of her hair, can see the weave pattern in her dress, can count her fingers where they're reaching up toward the light. The ranger I finally talked to, the one who told me about the anniversary, said Hallie's always been active around July 6th. Said people report feeling hands on their ankles every year, like clockwork. He said it so casually, like it was just a thing that happens. Like the lake having a ghost was as normal as it having trout. Then he asked to see the photo. I showed him, watched his face go pale. He stared at it for a long time before handing my phone back and saying, very quietly, "That's her. That's Hallie. But I've never seen her that close to someone before. I don't swim anymore. Not in lakes, not in rivers, not even in pools if they're deep enough that I can't see the bottom. Because I know what's down there now. I know that some people don't leave the places they died, and I know that Lake Crescent keeps its dead so perfectly preserved that they can still reach up and touch you 70 years later. And that photograph on my phone? Last time I looked, her hand was breaking the surface. Just fingers, just the tips. But they were above the waterline, which means she's getting closer, which means whatever she grabbed onto that day at Devil's Punch Bowl, she hasn't let go yet, and I don't think she's planning to. Have you ever been somewhere so isolated that you start questioning whether other people are even real anymore? I'm talking about the kind of alone where you're a mile above sea level. It's 4:30 in the morning. The nearest town is an hour's drive down a mountain road, and you're the only living thing for miles. That's what Hurricane Ridge feels like before dawn. That's what it felt like when I realized I wasn't alone up there. And that somehow, being alone would have been better. I'm a landscape photographer. Sunrise shots are my specialty, which means I've gotten used to being places before anyone else. Setting up my gear in the dark, waiting for that first light to hit. Hurricane Ridge is one of my regular spots. 200 feet up in the Olympic Mountains, above the cloud layer, with views that make people forget how to breathe. But you have to get there early, before the tourist crowds, before the visitor center opens, you have to be willing to stand in the parking lot in the dark with just your tripod and your camera and the wind that never stops blowing up there. I'd done it a dozen times before. Never had a problem. Never felt anything except maybe a little spooked by how dark it gets when you're above the tree line and the stars are so bright they cast shadows. But that morning, July 23rd, I remember because it was supposed to be a clear dawn, perfect conditions. Something was different the moment I pulled into the parking lot. There was another car there, an old sedan, maybe from the 90s, with its engine running and its headlights on, pointed toward the visitor center. Just sitting there, idling, exhaust visible in my headlights. And I remember feeling this weird mix of relief and annoyance. Relief because, hey, I'm not completely alone up here in the dark. Annoyance because I liked having the spot to myself. And now I'd have to share the view with whoever was sitting in that car. Except as I parked and started unloading my gear, I realized something was off. The car had been running when I arrived, but I couldn't see anyone inside. The windows were dark, the interior light wasn't on, and nobody was moving. Maybe they were sleeping, I thought. Maybe they'd pulled over to rest and left the engine running for heat. But it was July. It wasn't cold enough for that. I tried to ignore it. Set up my tripod, mounted my camera, started composing my shots. But I couldn't stop looking at that car. The headlights were so bright, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. And they were pointed directly at the visitor center's big glass windows. And that's when I noticed something that made my hands freeze on the camera controls. There were people inside the visitor center, moving around, visible through the glass, backlit by some kind of light source I couldn't identify. But the visitor center doesn't open until 9 a.m. The doors are locked. There's no reason for anyone to be inside at 4:30 in the morning. I stood there watching them, trying to make sense of it. Maintenance workers maybe? Security? But the more I watched, the more wrong it seemed. They were moving too slowly, too deliberately, like they were wandering rather than working. And there were at least 4 of them, maybe 5, all drifting past those big windows in this slow, aimless pattern that made my stomach knot up. That's when I decided to check on the car. I don't know why. Maybe I thought whoever was inside might know what was going on, might be able to explain the people in the visitor center. I walked over, my boots crunching on the gravel, and the sound was so loud in that high-altitude silence that it felt like gunshots. The engine was still running, that steady rumble, exhaust still pumping out into the cold air. I got close enough to see the license plate. Expired in 1994. Expired for 31 years. My skin went cold. I leaned down to look through the driver's window, cupping my hands against the glass to see inside. Empty. Completely empty. But the keys were in the ignition, turned to on, and the interior was ice cold. I could see frost on the steering wheel, on the dashboard, like the car had been sitting in a freezer. And when I pulled my hand back from the window, my palm left a print in condensation that shouldn't have been there on the outside of the glass. I turned back toward the visitor center, and that's when they saw me. All of them, at once, stopped moving and turned toward the windows. Toward me. I could see them more clearly now. They were wearing hiking gear, the kind from the 90s, bright colors and heavy boots. And their faces were visible enough that I could see their mouths were open. All of them were screaming silently, pressing their hands against the glass from the inside, and I couldn't hear a sound. Not through the distance, not through the glass, nothing. just their mouths open in these perfect O's of terror, their breath fogging up the windows, their palms flat against the glass like they were trying to push through. I ran back to my car, forgot my tripod, forgot my camera, just ran. My lungs were burning. That thin mountain air makes everything harder, and my keys kept slipping in my shaking hands. I got the door open, threw myself inside, and that's when I looked back at the visitor center one more time. The sun was just starting to rise, that first pink light hitting the mountain peaks. And in that light, I could see the people in the windows more clearly. They were still there, still pressed against the glass, and I could see their clothing was torn, dirty, stained with something dark. Their faces were gray, frostbitten, and their eyes were white like they'd been snowblind. And they were all looking at me with this desperate, pleading expression that made me understand they weren't trying to get out. They were trying to warn me, trying to tell me something. Then the sun crested the ridge behind me, real light, actual daylight, and they vanished. Just gone. The visitor center windows showed nothing but darkness inside. Normal darkness. The kind you'd expect from a locked building before opening hours. The car was still there, still running. But when I looked at it in the growing light, I could see the tires were flat, the paint was oxidized and peeling, and there was a thick layer of dust on every surface except the windows. Like it had been sitting there for decades, but someone kept cleaning the glass. I called 911 from the parking lot, told them there was an abandoned vehicle at Hurricane Ridge, didn't mention the rest because I didn't know how to explain the rest. The ranger who showed up an hour later knew the car immediately. He got this look on his face, this exhausted, seen this before look. And he told me about the family that went missing in December 1994. 4 people headed up to Hurricane Ridge to see the snow. Never came back down. They found the parents' car at the base of the mountain 2 weeks later, but the parents and their 2 teenage kids were never found. Search and rescue looked for months. Nothing. He said the car I saw was their vehicle. He said it shows up in the parking lot sometimes, always with the engine running, always at night or early morning. He said people have reported seeing figures in the visitor center windows during those times, wearing 90s hiking gear, looking like they're trapped behind the glass. He said all this like he was telling me the hours of operation, like it was just a fact about the park. I went back for my camera 2 days later, during normal visiting hours, with plenty of other tourists around. Found my tripod exactly where I'd left it. But when I checked the camera's memory card, there were photos I didn't take. Time-stamped, 4:47 a.m., shots of the visitor center windows. And in every single one, you can see them, pressed against the glass, mouths open, 4 people who've been trying to scream for 31 years in a place where sound doesn't carry and morning never comes. I still shoot sunrise photos, but never at Hurricane Ridge, and never, ever before 5 a.m. Because that's when the lost ones come looking for someone who can see them. And if you see them, if you really see them, and you're alone enough and isolated enough that you might as well not exist, they start to think maybe you can help. Maybe you can let them out. Maybe you can take their place in that eternal dark where the sun is always just about to rise but never does. You know what's strange about rainforests? They're not quiet. People think forests are peaceful, serene, but the Hoh Rainforest is constantly making noise. Dripping, growing, decomposing, all at once. This wet, organic sound that never stops. It's the sound of things rotting and things being born in the same breath. And after 3 hours on the Hall of Moss's trail, that sound gets inside your head, and you start to realize it's not peaceful at all. It's hungry. And on August 14th, I learned exactly what it was hungry for. I'm a mycologist. I study fungi, which means I spend a lot of time in wet places where things decompose. And the Hoh Rainforest is one of the best places in North America for that kind of work. 200 inches of rain a year, humidity at 100% almost constantly, and decomposition rates that are off the charts. Everything that falls in that forest gets consumed within weeks. Logs, leaves, animals, everything. The forest doesn't waste anything. I thought that was fascinating. I thought I understood what I was looking at. The Hall of Mosses Trail is supposed to be 0.8 miles. That's what the park map says. That's what the signs say. That's what every ranger will tell you. It's a loop trail, takes maybe 45 minutes at a casual pace, and it's one of the most popular hikes in Olympic National Park because the trees there are unbelievable. Sitka spruce and big-leaf maples so covered in moss, they look like something from a fantasy movie, all green and dripping and ancient. I'd hiked it a dozen times for my research. Never saw anything unusual. Never went past the loop. But that day, I saw the marker. Trail marker 2.3, brown wooden post with white numbers, stuck in the ground right where the trail should have curved back toward the parking lot. And that made no sense because the whole trail is less than a mile. There shouldn't be a marker at 2.3 miles. I stood there staring at it, my hiking boots sinking slowly into the soft mud. And I remember thinking it was a prank, some hiker's joke. But the marker looked official, weathered, covered in the same moss as everything else, like it had been there for decades. I should have turned around. Every part of my training, every instinct I've developed in 15 years of field research, was telling me to mark the coordinates, report it to the Park Service, and head back. But you have to understand, I'm a scientist. Unexplained phenomena are exactly what I'm supposed to investigate. So I kept walking. The trail past marker 2.3 looked the same at first. Same moss-covered trees, same nurse logs with entire ecosystems growing on top of them. Same ferns crowding the path. But subtle things were wrong. The trees were taller. I mean, noticeably taller. Like they'd gained 50 feet in the space of 100 yards. The moss was thicker, hanging in curtains from branches, and when I brushed past it, it was warm. Not sun-warmed, because no sun reaches the Hall of Mosses floor. Warm like body temperature, like it was generating its own heat. I checked my instruments. Temperature, 68 degrees. Humidity, 127%. That's impossible. Humidity can't exceed 100% outside of a closed system. I checked my hygrometer 3 times, thinking it was malfunctioning. But the reading stayed the same. The air around me was supersaturated, holding more moisture than should be physically possible. And I could feel it, thick, almost liquid, coating my skin and clothes. That's when I noticed the moss on my boots. Just a small patch on the left toe, bright green against the black leather. I bent down to brush it off, and it didn't move. I scraped at it with my fingernail, and I felt it. Felt the roots, thin as hair, that had somehow penetrated the leather. In less than 20 minutes of walking, moss had started growing on my boots. On my boots while I was wearing them. I stood up fast, heart hammering, and checked the rest of my gear. My backpack had small patches of moss on the straps. My jacket had moss growing on the shoulders where water had dripped from branches above. And when I looked at my hands, my exposed hands that had been pushing ferns aside and steadying myself on trees, there were tiny green threads in the creases of my palms. Growing. I could see them growing, spreading across my skin like fractures in glass. And when I tried to wipe them away, they pulled, rooted into the top layer of my skin. I ran, turned around and ran back the way I'd come, my breath harsh in that thick air, my boots squelching in mud that seemed deeper than before. But the trail didn't look the same. The trees had moved. I know how that sounds. But I'm telling you, the trees were in different positions. The trail forked where it hadn't forked before. My GPS was spinning, the coordinates scrambling, showing me moving in directions I wasn't moving. And my phone screen was fogging up from the inside. Moisture creeping into the sealed device. The moss was spreading. I could feel it on my neck now, creeping up from my collar, warm and wet and alive. I tore my jacket off, threw it on the trail, and watched as it began sinking into the mud. Green threads already covering it, pulling it down. My shirt underneath was soaked through, and when I looked down, I could see moss growing in the fabric, spreading from the wet patches, turning the gray cotton green. I found them at what should have been the halfway point. 3 backpacks, sitting in the middle of the trail, so covered in moss they were almost unrecognizable. I stopped, my chest heaving, and looked closer. They weren't empty. Inside the moss, inside what used to be fabric and frame, I could see the shapes of belongings: water bottles, guidebooks, car keys. And next to the largest pack, a hiking boot, still laced, with something that looked like bone visible at the top. Covered completely in moss, consumed by the forest, turned into another nurse log, another piece of the ecosystem. That's when I heard it. Behind me, from the direction I'd come, the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. Not animal sounds, no footsteps, no breathing. Just the sound of branches moving, ferns parting, and that constant dripping, growing sound intensifying. The forest was following me. The forest itself was moving, closing in, and I could smell it now. That rich, organic smell of active decomposition, of things being broken down and absorbed. I don't remember the next part clearly. I remember running until my lungs felt like they were shredded. Remember the moss on my skin burning. Remember my vision starting to blur with green at the edges. I remember seeing marker 2.3 again, and then marker 1.0, and then finally, miraculously, the parking lot. I burst out of that trailhead into sunlight, actual sunlight, and I collapsed next to my car. Park rangers found me maybe 20 minutes later. I was conscious, but not coherent, trying to pull moss off my skin, leaving red welts where I'd torn it out along with the top layer of dermis. They took me to Forks Community Hospital, and the doctor who treated me said I had something he'd never seen before. Active moss growth in the subdermal layer, roots that had penetrated 3 millimeters deep in the 28 minutes I was past marker 2.3. They had to use antifungal medication designed for internal infections to stop it from spreading. I've still got the scars. Little white lines across my palms, my neck, my scalp where hair doesn't grow anymore. And sometimes, when it's humid, when I'm in the shower or it's raining hard, I can feel something under those scars. A warmth, a slight itch. Like something's still there, dormant, waiting for the right conditions to grow again. The Park Service says marker 2.3 doesn't exist. They say the Hall of Mosses Trail is 0.8 miles, end of discussion, and any reports of markers beyond the loop are misidentifications or vandalism. But they also say I'm the 3rd person in the last 5 years to be treated for unexplained moss growth after hiking that trail. They say it quietly, off the record like they're afraid someone's listening. I haven't been back. Won't go back. Because I understand now what I didn't understand before. The Hoh Rainforest has been decomposing and consuming and growing for 10,000 years. And it's very, very good at what it does. It breaks things down to their basic components and uses them to feed itself. And somewhere past marker 2.3, in a place where humidity exceeds 100% and moss grows on living flesh, the forest has decided that humans are just another resource. Just another thing to decompose. Just another meal for the endless, patient hunger of that green darkness. And the worst part? Those backpacks I saw? The rangers knew exactly who they belonged to. 3 hikers missing since 2019, last seen entering the Hall of Mosses Trail. They never found the bodies. But I know where they are. They're still there. Feeding the forest, becoming the forest. Their bones wrapped in moss and their flesh long since converted into nutrients for trees that just keep growing taller and taller, reaching for a sky they'll never see through that eternal green canopy. And someday, when enough time passes, those trees will have names carved into them by hikers who have no idea what they're touching, who they're touching. Do you ever wonder what you do when you're not paying attention? I don't mean daydreaming or zoning out during a boring meeting. I mean the gaps, the real gaps, where time just vanishes and you can't account for where you were or what you were doing. Most people don't think about those moments. They just accept that memory has holes. But I can't stop thinking about mine. Because 26 minutes disappeared from my life on September 3rd. And when I got those minutes back through security footage I never should have seen, I watched myself do things that I don't remember doing. Things I would never do. Things that weren't me moving my body. I took a night security job at the Forks Timber Museum because the pay was decent and the work seemed easy. Sit in a small office, monitor 6 security cameras, do 2 building checks per shift. Go home at 6 a.m. The museum's not large. Maybe 3,000 square feet of old logging equipment, historical photographs, and artifacts from the timber camps that used to dominate the Olympic Peninsula. During the day, it gets a steady stream of tourists, people interested in local history, families killing time between twilight locations. At night, it's just silent machinery, and the smell of old wood and machine oil that never quite fades. They told me about Widowmaker during training. It's a cross-cut saw from the 1952 Bogachiel camp accident, mounted on the wall in the main exhibit hall, and it has a reputation. The saw was being used to buck a massive old-growth cedar when something went wrong. Accounts vary. But the result was 3 men dead, one of them nearly cut in half. The camp closed after that. And eventually the saw ended up in the museum, and according to my supervisor, it's been acting strange ever since, vibrating on its mount at exactly 3:17 a.m. every single night, the exact time the accident happened. I laughed when he told me, asked if the place was haunted. He didn't laugh back, just said to stay in the office between 3 and 3:30 a.m., and if I heard anything from the main hall, don't investigate until after 3:30. He said it like it was official policy, like it was written in some employee handbook, and when I asked why, he just repeated, "Stay in the office." Then he showed me 17 incident reports from previous night guards who'd quit without explanation, and I stopped laughing. The first week was fine. Quiet. Boring, actually. I'd do my rounds, sit in the office playing games on my phone, eat my lunch, do another round, go home. I heard the saw vibrate a few times when I checked the security monitors around 3:17 a.m., just a faint buzzing sound picked up by the hall microphones, nothing dramatic. It made me curious more than anything. Why would a saw vibrate on its own? Loose mount, maybe? Temperature fluctuations causing metal expansion, there had to be a logical explanation. On September 3rd, I decided to see for myself. I know, I'd been told specifically not to, but I'm not good with arbitrary rules that don't make sense, and this didn't make sense. It was 3:12 a.m., 5 minutes before the phenomenon, and I left the office and walked into the main exhibit hall with my flashlight and my phone camera ready. I was going to film the saw, document exactly what was happening, and figure out the rational explanation everyone was missing. The saw was mounted on the back wall, 7 feet long, cross-cut teeth still sharp after 70 years. In my flashlight beam, it looked perfectly ordinary. Old, rusted in places, with dark stains on the blade that I didn't want to think too hard about. I positioned myself about 10 feet away, hit record on my phone, and waited. 3:17 a.m. came. The saw started vibrating. Not dramatically, just a low hum, a vibration that made the teeth blur slightly, made the mount creak. And then I heard it. A high-pitched whine, exactly like a sawmill blade under load, cutting through wood. Except there was no motor, no power source, nothing that should be making that sound. It was coming from the saw itself, and it was getting louder. That's when my mind started filling with images I didn't put there. Cutting motions, sawing motions. The precise angle you need to buck a log, the rhythm of the blade, the way you have to let the saw do the work or you'll bind it in the cut. I've never logged in my life. Never used a cross-cut saw, but suddenly I knew exactly how it felt. The weight of the handles, the resistance of the wood, the satisfaction of a clean cut. And under those images, darker ones. The feeling of the saw binding, kicking back, the blade twisting in the cut. The moment when it stops being a tool and becomes a weapon, and the hot, wet impact of teeth meeting flesh instead of wood. I don't remember what happened next. That's the gap. That's my missing 26 minutes. One moment I'm standing there, phone in hand, watching the saw vibrate and feeling these intrusive thoughts. And the next moment, I'm on the floor of the office, my hands bleeding, my phone showing 3:43 a.m., and every muscle in my body aching like I've been doing hard, physical labor. My head felt like it was full of static, and my mouth tasted like metal and sawdust. I bandaged my hands, deep cuts across both palms, straight lines like I'd grabbed something sharp, and I finished my shift in a daze. Didn't file an incident report, didn't tell anyone. Just went home and slept for 14 hours straight. And when I woke up, I could still feel the phantom weight of saw handles in my grip. I should have quit then. Should have walked away and never gone back. But the missing time bothered me more than anything that happened before or after it. I needed to know. So 3 days later, during my shift, I accessed the security footage from September 3rd. The system keeps recordings for 30 days before overwriting them. And I pulled up the main hall camera, time-stamped 3:15 a.m. I watched myself walk into the frame at 3:16. Watched myself position my phone and wait. Watched the timestamp tick to 3:17. Watched the saw start vibrating. And then I watched myself change. It wasn't dramatic. No glowing eyes, no contortions, nothing movie-like. But my posture shifted, my movements became different, and I walked straight to the saw and lifted it off its mount like it weighed nothing. It's a 7-foot crosscut saw, has to weigh 70 pounds, and I took it down one-handed and carried it to the center of the hall. For the next 23 minutes, I watched myself make sawing motions with that blade, practicing cuts, adjusting my grip, testing angles, moving like someone who'd been using that saw for decades, fluid and precise. And my face, My face was completely blank. Not concentrating, not struggling, just empty, like I was a machine running a program. And the worst part, the part that made my hands shake so hard I almost dropped the mouse, was that I was talking. My mouth was moving, forming words I couldn't hear because the audio on that camera wasn't good enough. But I was having a conversation with something, responding to something, nodding, adjusting my technique based on instructions I was receiving from something the camera couldn't see. At 3:40, I watched myself carefully remount the saw, exactly as it had been. Watched myself walk toward the office, staggering slightly now, like whatever had been piloting my body had let go, and I was coming back to myself. At 3:42, I collapsed in the hallway just outside the office door. At 3:43, I got up, stumbled into the office, and sat down. A minute later, the version of me in the video touched my bleeding hands with this confused expression, like I just noticed them. And that's when my memory picks up again. I sat in that office for 3 hours watching that footage over and over. And every time I noticed new details that made it worse. The way I tested the edge of the blade with my thumb, opening a deep cut without reacting to the pain. The way I made sawing motions toward the security camera like I was showing someone how to cut it down. The way, twice, I stopped and turned my head toward the empty air beside me, listening to something, before nodding and adjusting my grip. I checked the other cameras. Nothing unusual on any of them. Just me in the main hall, alone, practicing cutting techniques with a saw that killed 3 men in 1952 for 23 minutes while something else was driving my body around. I quit the next day. Told my supervisor I was moving, family emergency, whatever excuse came to mind. He didn't look surprised, just asked if anything happened, and when I shook my head, he gave me this look like he knew I was lying but was grateful for it. Then he said something I can't stop thinking about. "You're the longest anyone's lasted in 3 years. Most people quit after the first week." I asked him why he stayed, why he kept working there knowing what was happening. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "Because someone has to make sure it stays on the wall. You saw the footage, right? What you were doing?" I nodded. He leaned in close and whispered, "That's what it's teaching people. That's what it's been teaching every guard who gets close enough. It's showing them how to use it, how to cut. And the thing is, the teaching stays with you. You remember what it taught you?" I did. I do. Even now, 4 months later, I can close my eyes and feel the weight of those handles, know exactly how to position a blade for maximum efficiency, understand the mechanics of cutting through wood or bone, because at a certain level of sharpness, there's no difference. I have knowledge I never learned, skills I never practiced, and sometimes, late at night, my hands move on their own, making small sawing motions, adjusting an invisible grip. The museum director's notes from 1955, the ones my supervisor showed me after I quit, said the saw was acting strangely even before the accident. Said several loggers complained it was trying to teach them wrong, that it was making them adjust their technique in ways that felt dangerous. The foreman dismissed it as superstition. 3 weeks later, 3 men were dead. What kills me, what keeps me up at night, is the question my supervisor asked before I left. "Did you dismantle any safety equipment during those 23 minutes? Did you tamper with anything?" I didn't. But I wanted to. In that footage, you can see me looking at the fire alarm panel, at the emergency exit lock mechanism, at the security system control box. Looking at them the way you look at obstacles, at things that need to be removed before you can do a job properly. And I think if I'd been under for 5 more minutes, if whatever was teaching me had a little more time, I would have. Because that's what Widowmaker does. It doesn't just vibrate at 3:17 a.m. It teaches. It prepares. It's been doing it for 70 years, passing along the knowledge of how to kill efficiently with a blade to anyone who gets close enough to listen. And someday, eventually, it's going to find someone who listens all the way through the lesson. I still have the scars on my palms from grabbing that blade. They haven't faded. Probably never will. But that's not what bothers me. What bothers me is that sometimes I look at those scars and I don't remember the pain. I remember the satisfaction of a good grip, the way the handle feels in your bleeding hands, the knowledge that scarring improves grip strength, makes you better at holding on when the saw starts to buck. And I think, where did that thought come from? And I think, was it ever really mine? What do you think lives at the bottom of the ocean? I'm not talking about the shallow parts we've explored, the tourist-friendly depths where documentaries film bioluminescent jellyfish and tube worms. I'm talking about the real deep, the Hadal zones, the trenches that go down 7 miles where the pressure would crush you into paste, and we've sent more people to the moon than we have down there. We don't know what's in those depths. We've barely looked. And on October 12th, standing in a tide pool at First Beach on the Quinault Reservation during a new moon, I learned that sometimes the deep doesn't wait for us to come looking. Sometimes it reaches up. I'm a marine biology doctoral candidate. My dissertation research focuses on bioluminescent organisms in the Pacific Northwest. Specifically, the dinoflagellates that cause the glowing blue waves you sometimes see at night. First Beach is one of my regular research sites because the tide pools there have unusual bioluminescent activity. Higher concentrations, brighter displays, species that don't appear in any of the literature. My advisor thought I might be looking at an undocumented subspecies, which would make my career before I even graduated. The Kalaloch people were less enthusiastic about my research. I'd gotten permission from the tribal council to access the beach after hours, but the elder who handed me my permit gave me very specific instructions. Never visit during a new moon. When there's no moon in the sky, stay away from the tide pools. Don't look into the water when the sky is darkest. She said it like she was giving me directions to the grocery store, calm and matter-of-fact. And when I asked why, she just said, "The tide pools show reflections of other places when the sky is empty. Things that live in those other places sometimes look back." I'm a scientist. I deal in observable phenomena, measurable data, peer-reviewed research. I thanked her politely and ignored the warning completely, because new moon nights are when bioluminescence is most visible, when there's no competing light to wash out the glow, and I needed samples during optimal conditions. So on October 12th, the darkest night of the lunar cycle, I drove to First Beach with my sampling equipment and my waterproof notebooks and my complete certainty that I understood what I was looking at. The beach was empty. 3 a.m., no moon, just stars so bright they cast actual shadows on the sand, and the sound of the Pacific rolling in with that deep rhythmic crash that makes you feel small. The tide pools were glowing. Not just glowing, luminous, like someone had poured liquid light into the natural rock formations. Blues and greens that seemed too bright to be biological, too vivid to be real. I'd seen bioluminescence hundreds of times, but this was different. This was almost electric. I knelt beside the largest pool, maybe 6 feet across, and supposedly 6 inches deep according to my previous surveys. and I started setting up my sampling equipment. The water was calm, undisturbed, perfectly clear. And when I looked into it, I could see stars reflected on the surface. Except they were the wrong stars, not the constellations I'd seen overhead. Not anything I recognized from Northern Hemisphere astronomy. The patterns were alien, and the colors were off. Stars that looked red where they should be white, blue where they should be yellow, and formations that seemed to suggest different laws of physics. I blinked, looked up at the real sky, looked back down at the pool. The reflection didn't match. Not even close. And when I moved my head, the reflection moved with me. My face was visible in the water. But the sky behind my reflection stayed wrong. Like I was seeing myself superimposed over a window to somewhere else. That should have been my exit cue. Should have packed up my equipment and left. But I'm stubborn, and I was thinking about contaminated optics, about atmospheric effects I didn't understand, about anything except what the elder had told me. So I reached down with my collection bottle to take a water sample. The moment the bottle broke the surface, the depth changed. That 6-inch tide pool became bottomless. I could see down and down and down, past any possible seafloor, into darkness that glowed with its own bioluminescence. Not scattered organisms, but concentrated sources, large shapes moving in formation far below, patterns that looked organized, intentional. And the bioluminescence was the wrong color, not blue or green, but something that doesn't have a name, something my eyes couldn't quite process, like my brain was trying to interpret a wavelength humans aren't supposed to see. My collection bottle was being pulled, not by current, not by tide, but by active suction, like something deep in that impossible depth was inhaling, drawing water downward, and my bottle with it. I held on, stupid instinct, and I felt the pull intensify. Felt something that wasn't water against my fingers, something thicker, colder, that moved with intention. And then I saw its surface. Just briefly, just enough. Something massive rising from the depths of a 6-inch tide pool. I can't describe it properly. My brain won't let me remember it clearly, keeps fuzzing out the details like it's protecting me from fully processing what I saw. But I remember geometry that was wrong, angles that shouldn't connect the way they did, and bioluminescence that pulsed in patterns that felt like communication, like it was looking at me, studying me, figuring out what I was. And I remember eyes, not animal eyes, not anything evolved on Earth, but something that had intelligence behind it. Something that made me understand instantly that I was not the observer in this situation. I was the specimen. I let go of the bottle, pulled my hand back, but I wasn't fast enough. Something came out with my hand, attached to my fingers, my wrist, spreading up my forearm. Barnacles, dozens of them, growing in fast motion, white and crusty and cold, their shells forming in seconds, cementing themselves to my skin. I screamed and fell backward onto the rocks, and the moment I broke contact with the water, the pool was shallow again. 6 inches. Normal depth. The stars reflected properly. The barnacles on my arm stopped growing. I ran to my car with my equipment abandoned on the beach, drove straight to Forks Community Hospital with my arm wrapped in my jacket, and told the ER doctor I'd slipped and fallen into contaminated water. They removed the barnacles surgically, had to cut them out because the bases had fused with my skin, and sent samples to the state lab for analysis because they'd never seen anything like them. Neither had the lab. Neither had the marine biology department at University of Washington when the hospital forwarded the samples, because the barnacles weren't any known species. The shell composition was wrong. Calcium carbonate, yes, but with trace elements that don't occur naturally in Pacific seawater. The DNA sequencing came back impossible. Genetic markers that don't fit any terrestrial taxonomy. Base pairs arranged in configurations that shouldn't produce viable organisms. The report concluded contamination, lab error, sample degradation. But I have the scars where they removed those barnacles. And I have the dreams. Every night since October 12th, I dream I'm underwater, sinking through impossible depths, past the Hadal zones, past the core of the Earth, into spaces that aren't ocean anymore, but something else, somewhere else. And in those dreams, I see cities. Geometric structures that follow mathematical principles we haven't discovered. Lights moving in patterns that look like language. And creatures that aren't creatures, that are something we don't have taxonomy for. Living in pressurized darkness that isn't part of our ocean, that's connected to it, but exists somewhere our physics doesn't quite reach. I've been back to First Beach twice during daylight hours. The tide pools look normal, shallow, clear, full of regular anemones and crabs and small fish. I've checked the water depth with measuring equipment. 6 inches, exactly as surveyed. But I haven't been back at night, and I won't go back during a new moon, because I understand now what the elder was trying to tell me. The tide pools at First Beach aren't just pools. They're apertures. Connections to somewhere else, somewhere deep and dark and vast, where things we can't comprehend have been living for longer than humans have existed. And when the sky is darkest, when there's no competing light, those connections open wider. The Coast Guard has been tracking a persistent sonar anomaly off the coast of La Push for the last 2 months. Something large, something that appears on deep water readings but vanishes when they try to get closer. They've classified it as equipment malfunction. Underwater geology they're misinterpreting. Anything except what it obviously is. Something that's visiting. Something that's interested. I've been documenting my symptoms. The scars where the barnacles were removed have started changing color. Not infection, not bruising, but bioluminescence. Faint, only visible in complete darkness. But they glow with that same wrong color light I saw in the tide pool. And I can feel them. Not pain, not itching, but awareness. Like they're sensors. Like something installed receivers in my body. And now I'm picking up signals I shouldn't be able to detect. Last week I started understanding what the signals mean. It's not language, not exactly. But it's information. Depth coordinates, pressure readings, temperature gradients from waters deeper than the Mariana Trench. And locations. Specific locations where the ocean floor is thin, where the connections between here and there are closest. Where something large enough to show up on sonar can push through if it wants to. La Push is one of those locations. First Beach specifically. The tide pools during new moon. And the next new moon is November 27th, 15 days from now. And I can feel the signals intensifying. Feel something anticipating it. And I don't know if what's coming through is curious or hungry, or something we don't have words for because we've never encountered intention that alien. I tried to warn the tribal council, asked to meet with the elder who gave me the permit. She listened to everything I said, looked at my glowing scars in the darkened room, and told me what I already knew. You looked back. When it looked at you, you looked back. Now it knows you're here. Now it knows we're all here. She said they have stories, thousands of years of stories, about what lives in the deep water and what happens when the barriers get thin. Stories about the thunderbird fighting sea creatures, keeping them contained, maintaining the balance. But the Thunderbird is a story now. A symbol, not an active force. And the things in the deep are patient. They've been patient for a very long time. They can wait for nights when the sky is empty and the barriers are thinnest and someone stupid enough opens a connection by reaching into water that reflects the wrong stars. I'm writing this because I'm going back to First Beach on November 27th. Not because I want to, because I have to. The signals in my scars aren't just information anymore. They're instructions, and my body is starting to follow them without consulting my brain. I've caught myself driving toward La Push 3 times this week. Had to physically turn the car around. Whatever attached to me in that tide pool, it's not done with me. It installed something that's slowly taking over, turning me into a beacon or a translator or a doorway. And I need to know what it wants before I stop being able to resist. If you're reading this and I haven't updated it by December 1st, you'll know the signals won. You'll know something came through. And if you ever find yourself at First Beach during a new moon, if you see the tide pools glowing with colors that don't belong in nature, if you look into the water and see stars that aren't in our sky, don't reach in. Don't make contact. Because the things that live in the spaces between oceans, in the gaps between here and there, they're looking for ways through. And they're very, very good at turning curious people into doors. There's something deeply comforting about old lodges, isn't there? The crackling fireplaces, the smell of cedar and old wood polish, the sense that you're stepping back into a simpler time where people took care of each other and hospitality meant something. That's what drew me to Lake Quinault Lodge for my anniversary. The promise of escaping into the past for a weekend, experiencing what travel used to feel like before everything became sterile and corporate. The website showed this beautiful 1920s building nestled against the lake, all rustic charm and historic elegance. And when I saw they had a room called the Beverly Suite with its own ghost story, I thought it was perfect. Romantic even. A friendly ghost who helped guests, who made sure their stay was comfortable. What could be more charming than that? I didn't know that help can be a cage. I didn't know that some spirits don't just want to serve. They want you to stay exactly as they remember, doing exactly what they expect, playing your role in their eternal script. And if you don't cooperate, if you try to exist in your own time while occupying their space, they have ways of making you fit. We checked in on November 2nd, a Friday afternoon, and the lodge was exactly as beautiful as the photos promised. The main building has this massive stone fireplace in the lobby, Roosevelt elk heads mounted on the walls, and that particular smell of old places, wood smoke and history, and something slightly musty that isn't quite unpleasant. The woman at the desk seemed genuinely excited when she learned we'd booked the Beverly Suite. "Oh, you'll love room 302, she said with this knowing smile. Beverly takes very good care of her guests. Some people say it's the best stay they've ever had. She said it like Beverly was still employed there, still on staff, and I remember thinking that was a cute touch, playing up the ghost story for the tourists. The room was on the 3rd floor, up a creaking staircase that had probably been there since the lodge opened in 1926. The key was an actual metal key, not a plastic card. And when I unlocked the door and pushed it open, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Not musty, not old, but fresh lavender and lemon oil, like someone had just finished cleaning. The room was beautiful in that early 20th century way. Floral wallpaper, a brass bed with a white coverlet, lace curtains filtering the afternoon light from the lake. It looked like a period photograph, pristinely maintained. And I loved it immediately. My partner started unpacking while I explored the room, opening drawers, checking out the bathroom with its clawfoot tub and pedestal sink. Everything was perfect, almost too perfect. The towels were arranged in this elaborate fan pattern I'd never seen in a modern hotel. The toiletries on the sink were in glass bottles instead of plastic, real glass bottles with hand-lettered labels that said rose water and glycerin soap in fountain pen script. I assumed it was part of the historic theming, the lodge going the extra mile for authenticity. We went to dinner in the lodge restaurant, had a wonderful meal, walked around the lake as the sun set. When we got back to the room around 9 p.m., things had been tidied. The bed was turned down. I expected that. But our clothes had been unpacked. Not just unpacked, but arranged. My partner's suits were hanging in the wardrobe, organized by color. My dresses were arranged the same way. Our shoes were lined up under the window. And our toiletries, which we'd left scattered on the bathroom counter, were now arranged on the sink in perfectly symmetrical rows, labels facing out. "Wow," my partner said. "That's impressive turn-down service." But something felt off. Hotels don't unpack your luggage. They don't arrange your belongings. I'd specifically left my jewelry in my suitcase, and now it was laid out on the dresser in this elaborate display. Necklaces hung on a small jewelry tree I'd never seen before. Earrings arranged in pairs in a velvet-lined box that wasn't mine. It was beautiful, meticulous, and completely invasive. I called the front desk, asked if someone had been in our room beyond normal turn-down service. The night clerk sounded confused. "Turn-down service ended at 8, he said, "and we never touch guests' personal belongings. Are you in the Beverly Suite?" When I confirmed, he got quiet for a moment, then said, "Oh, well, Beverly likes things organized. Some guests find it charming." I should have asked to change rooms right then. But it was late, we were tired, and honestly, it was just clothes and jewelry, right? Nothing was missing, nothing was damaged, just rearranged. We laughed it off, made jokes about having a very helpful ghost, and went to bed. I woke up at 3 a.m. because something felt wrong. The room was cold, not just chilly, but genuinely cold, my breath visible in the air. And I could smell smoke. Not fresh smoke, but old smoke. The lingering scent of something that burned a long time ago, embedded in walls and fabric. I sat up and looked around, and in the moonlight coming through the lace curtains, I saw that the room had changed. The modern bedside lamps were gone. In their place were oil lamps with glass chimneys, unlit but definitely not electric. The alarm clock was gone. Our phones, which we'd left charging on the nightstand, were gone. And the photograph we'd taken at dinner and propped against the mirror, a silly selfie on my phone, was replaced by a sepia-toned photograph in an antique frame showing a couple in 1920s formal wear standing in front of the lodge. I shook my partner awake, my heart hammering, and we both stared at the room. It wasn't just the nightstand. The television mounted on the wall was gone, replaced by a large mirror in a gilt frame. Our suitcases, which we'd left partially packed under the window, were replaced by a steamer trunk with brass corners. And on the chair where I'd draped my jeans and sweater, there was a dress, a 1920s-style drop-waist dress in pale blue silk that I'd never seen before, arranged as if waiting to be worn. My partner got up to turn on the lights, but the light switch didn't work. The electrical outlet where our phones had been charging was gone, just smooth wallpaper where it should have been. We were in a room that looked exactly like room 302, probably looked in 1926, and none of our modern belongings were visible anywhere. "We need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. I got out of bed and started searching for my clothes, my phone, my shoes, anything from our actual time period. But the wardrobe held only period clothing, perfectly pressed and arranged. The dresser drawers held undergarments from the 1920s, stockings and garters and chemises made of silk and cotton, nothing synthetic, nothing modern. It was like we'd been edited out of our own lives and pasted into someone else's. That's when I saw her. Standing in the corner near the bathroom door, partially obscured by shadow, a woman in a housekeeper's uniform. Black dress, white apron, hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wasn't transparent or glowing or any of the things ghosts are supposed to be. She looked solid, real, and she was smiling at me with this pleased, expectant expression, like a teacher waiting for a student to solve a problem. "Your dress is ready," she said, gesturing to the blue silk dress on the chair. Her voice was clear, normal, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "You'll want to dress for breakfast. The dining room opens at 7, and it's important to be punctual." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. This was Beverly, had to be Beverly. And she was talking to me like this was completely normal, like she'd just done me a favor by erasing my entire present and replacing it with her preferred past. "Who are you?" my partner managed to ask. Beverly looked confused, almost hurt. "I'm the housekeeper," she said. "I take care of the guests. I make sure everything is proper. You left such a mess. Modern things everywhere. Plastic and metal and those terrible glowing rectangles. I've put it all away. You'll be much more comfortable this way. Much more appropriate." "We want our things back," I said, finding my voice. "Our phones, our clothes, our belongings. Right now." Her expression changed. The smile faded, and something cold moved behind her eyes. "I cleaned," she said, her voice harder now. "I organized. I made things right. Guests are supposed to appreciate good service. Guests are supposed to behave appropriately." She took a step closer, and I could smell smoke intensifying, could feel heat that wasn't coming from any visible source. "I died making this lodge perfect. Died in the fire, trying to save the linens, trying to maintain standards. And I'm still here, still serving, still keeping things as they should be. You will appreciate my service. You will dress appropriately. You will follow the proper schedule." The room temperature dropped even further. Frost started forming on the windows, spreading in patterns that looked deliberate, that looked like words. Breakfast 7 a.m. Dress formally. Behave. We ran. Didn't even try to get dressed, just ran in our pajamas straight for the door. And when I grabbed the handle, it was ice cold. Cold enough to burn. But I yanked it open, and we tumbled out into the hallway. And the moment we crossed the threshold, everything changed. The hallway was modern again. Emergency exit signs glowing red, fire extinguisher on the wall, our own time period. I looked back into room 302, and it was modern too. Our actual belongings visible, our phones on the nightstand, our clothes in our suitcases. Like the last hour hadn't happened. Like we'd imagined it. But we both saw it. We both experienced it. And when we looked at each other, at our hands, we saw the frost burns from the door handle, red welts across our palms that would take weeks to heal. We checked out at 4 a.m., didn't wait for morning, didn't try to explain. Just left our key at the unmanned front desk and drove straight home. But 3 days later, when I finally looked through the photos on my phone from that night, the photos I was sure we didn't have because our phones had vanished, I found images I didn't take. Time-stamped 3:17 a.m. Pictures of room 302 in full 1920s configuration. Pictures of us sleeping in that brass bed while Beverly stood over us, adjusting our blankets, her face close to the camera like she'd picked up my phone and taken a selfie. And in the final photo, a close-up of her face, her expression serene and satisfied, with a caption written in elegant cursive across the image. Proper guests return. Improper guests are taught. Everyone stays until they learn. I've gotten 3 emails since then from Lake Quinault Lodge, even though I never gave them my email address, asking when I'll be returning for another stay. The subject lines are always the same. Beverly is waiting. And attached to each email is a photograph of room 302. Progressively more period accurate, progressively less modern. Like someone is slowly erasing the 21st century from that space one object at a time. In the most recent photo, received yesterday, there's a dress laid out on the bed. My size, 1920s style, in pale blue silk, with a note in fountain pen on lodge stationery. I've kept your belongings safe. Your wardrobe is ready. Your room is prepared. Come home and let me take care of you properly. I won't go back. I'll never go back. But sometimes, late at night, I smell lavender and lemon oil in my own apartment. Sometimes I wake up to find my clothes arranged differently than I left them, organized by color, hung with period-appropriate spacing. And once, just once, I found all my modern jewelry gone from my dresser and replaced by a strand of pearls I'd never seen before, in a velvet box with a note. You'll need these for breakfast. Dress appropriately. Beverly doesn't just haunt room 302. She haunts everyone who doesn't appreciate her service, everyone who rejects her help. And she has forever to teach you proper behavior, proper gratitude, proper submission to the way things should be. Because in her world, the world she died trying to preserve, good guests don't leave until the housekeeper says they're ready. And Beverly never says you're ready. She just keeps helping, keeps organizing, keeps preparing you to stay in her perfect eternal 1926, where nothing changes and everyone knows their place, and the fire that killed her is always just beginning to burn. Have you ever seen something so impossible that your brain just refuses to process it? Not scary impossible, not supernatural impossible, but physics-breaking impossible. The kind of wrong that makes you question whether reality has rules at all, or if we've just been lucky that they've held consistent until now. I saw water flow upward at Duc Falls on November 8th at exactly 11:11 a.m. And I need you to understand that I don't mean it looked like it was flowing upward. I mean gravity reversed. I mean the laws of physics took a coffee break. And in those 111 seconds while the world ran backward, something old and patient made very clear that there are places humans aren't supposed to be, and consequences for ignoring that. I'm a physics teacher, high school level, nothing fancy. But I know enough to understand what's possible and what isn't. I'd taken a group of students on an educational trip to Olympic National Park, 14 juniors and seniors, all kids from my AP physics class who'd been studying fluid dynamics and gravitational forces. Duc Falls was supposed to be a practical demonstration. A 48-foot waterfall dropping into a narrow gorge, perfect for discussing velocity, pressure, and energy conversion. The hike was only 0.8 miles, easy trail, family-friendly, and we'd timed our arrival for late morning when the light would be perfect for observation and photography. We reached the viewing platform at 11:07 a.m. I remember checking my watch because I wanted to give the students exactly 15 minutes to take measurements, make observations, and complete their worksheets before we hiked back for lunch. The falls were spectacular. white water crashing down into that narrow canyon, mist creating rainbows in the sunlight, the constant roar that makes you raise your voice to be heard. Everything was exactly as it should be. Gravity pulling water down, physics behaving predictably, the universe following its own rules. At 11:11 a.m., everything stopped making sense. The sound changed first. That constant roar of falling water shifted, deepened, became something else. Not a crash, but an inhale, like the gorge itself was breathing in. Several students noticed it at the same time, looking up from their worksheets with confused expressions. Then we saw it. The water wasn't falling anymore. It was rising. Not misting, not spraying, but flowing upward in a solid column, defying gravity completely, climbing back up the cliff face it had just descended. I stood there frozen, my clipboard forgotten, watching 48 feet of water reverse direction. The flow was smooth, controlled, like someone had taken a video of a waterfall and played it backward, except this was happening in real time, in front of 14 students and me, with no cameras, no tricks, no explanation. Fish that had been swimming in the pool below were floating upward through the air, still moving their fins, still trying to swim but doing it through atmosphere instead of water. One landed on the viewing platform at my feet, gasping and thrashing. And when I bent down to pick it up, I felt it. Gravity was wrong. Not absent, but reversed. I could feel the pull upward against my body, like the earth was pushing instead of pulling, and I had to grip the railing to keep from lifting off the platform. The students started panicking. A couple of them were screaming, one was crying, and I was trying to be the adult, trying to stay calm and rational. But I couldn't explain what we were seeing. My entire understanding of physics, everything I'd spent 15 years teaching, was being violated right in front of me. Water doesn't flow upward. Objects don't fall toward the sky. Gravity doesn't reverse. These aren't theories or suggestions. These are laws, fundamental forces that don't just stop working because they feel like it. Then one of my students, a girl who'd been standing closest to the falls, started walking toward the water. Not casually, walking like she was being pulled, like she didn't have control of her legs anymore. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and she was saying something I couldn't quite hear over the sound of the reversed waterfall. I grabbed her arm, tried to pull her back, and she turned to look at me with this expression I'll never forget, not scared, not confused, but blissful, like she was hearing the most beautiful music in the world, and all she wanted was to get closer to the source. "It's calling," she said, her voice dreamy and distant. "Don't you hear it? It wants us to cross. It wants us to go through." I looked at the waterfall, at that impossible upward flow, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Behind the curtain of rising water, there was a space, a gap in the rock face that shouldn't exist, a darkness that looked deeper than geology should allow. And in that darkness, something was moving. Not water, not fish, but shapes that had geometry wrong. Forms that hurt to look at because my brain couldn't reconcile the angles. Couldn't make sense of what should be solid and what should be void. Two more students started moving toward the falls, all of them with that same blissful expression, that same sense of compulsion. I was screaming at them to stop, physically holding back the first student, and the other kids were trying to help, forming a human chain to keep our classmates from walking into the reversed waterfall. And all the while, I could feel the pull intensifying. Not physical pull, but mental. Like something was reaching into my thoughts and suggesting very politely that I should let go, should stop resisting, should just walk through that curtain of impossibility and see what was waiting on the other side. At 11:13 a.m., exactly 101 seconds after it started, gravity snapped back to normal. The water crashed downward with a sound like thunder. The fish in the air dropped, and the 3 students who'd been trying to reach the falls collapsed like puppets with cut strings. The darkness behind the waterfall was gone. Just normal rock, normal geology, normal reality. But the student I'd been holding, the first one who tried to walk into the falls, wasn't speaking English anymore. She was making sounds. Complex, structured sounds that had the rhythm of language, but weren't any language I recognized. The syllables were too long. The consonants were in combinations that shouldn't work with human vocal cords. And her face was contorted with the effort of producing sounds we're not biologically designed to make. One of my other students, the one who'd been taking a Native American Studies course, grabbed my arm and whispered, "That's Quinault. Old Quinault. I think she's saying, 'This is not your place,' over and over." We got the kids off that trail faster than I've ever moved a group of teenagers. Half carried the 3 who'd been affected, with them fighting us the whole way, trying to turn back toward the falls. When we reached the parking lot, all 3 collapsed again and came back to themselves. No memory of the reversed waterfall. No memory of trying to walk into it. No memory of the last hour. Complete amnesia. But the girl who'd spoken in Quinault couldn't stop crying, saying she'd heard something in those 111 seconds, something that was still echoing in her head. And she didn't know how to make it stop. I reported the incident to park rangers, told them everything, showed them the video one student had been filming, except when we played it back. The footage showed normal waterfall flow. No reversal, no upward water. Just a regular waterfall with students screaming and trying to move toward it for no visible reason. The rangers looked at each other with this expression I couldn't read. And the senior ranger pulled me aside and asked very quietly, "Did you arrive at exactly 11:11 a.m.? When I confirmed the time, he got this resigned look and said, "Duc Falls sits on old boundaries. Protected boundaries. The Quinault people consider this entire area sacred. Their stories say Thunderbird and Whale fought here, that the geography itself was shaped by forces older than humans. They don't visit this place during certain times. Don't cross certain thresholds. The falls are a marker, a warning. When they run backward, you're seeing the door between territories open. And whatever's on the other side, it notices who's watching." He showed me incident reports I shouldn't have seen. Reports dating back 30 years, all describing the same phenomenon. Water flowing upward at Duc Falls during specific times. Witnesses experiencing compulsion to enter the falls, and the same pattern of amnesia afterward. Some of the older reports mentioned people actually entering the water during the reversal. Those people were found hours or days later, miles from the falls, unable to explain how they got there, speaking in fragments of languages they'd never learned, with no memory of the time between. The worst report was from 1994. A man entered the falls during a reversal and emerged 48 hours later speaking only in Quinault, despite having no tribal connection or previous knowledge of the language. A tribal elder came to interview him and afterward told park officials, "He's been told to leave. He's been carrying a message for 2 days and doesn't know what it says because he doesn't understand the language he's speaking. The message is, this boundary is permanent. This warning is final. Stop crossing." My 3 students who were affected have been different since Duc Falls. The girl who spoke Quinault has started drawing geometric patterns she can't explain. Complex mathematical forms that, when I showed them to a colleague in advanced mathematics, he said represent impossible geometries, spaces that can't exist in 3 dimensions. Another student has developed tinnitus, a constant ringing that audio tests can't detect, but that he swears sounds like rushing water. The third refuses to enter any building with stone foundations, saying stone remembers things, saying she can hear the echoes of what happened when the boundaries were made. I've been back to Duc Falls once, during safe hours, mid-afternoon on a day with no numerical significance. The waterfall looked normal, sounded normal. But there's a spot on the viewing platform, right where I stood when gravity reversed, where my compass won't work. The needle spins constantly, unable to find north. Like the magnetic field, there has been scrambled by something that doesn't respect our physics. I teach differently now. Still cover fluid dynamics, still discuss gravitational forces. But I always add a caveat. These laws work consistently in most places, under most circumstances. But there are spots on Earth where different rules apply, where older forces are still active, and where the universe bends to accommodate things that existed before humans decided how physics should work. Duc Falls is one of those spots. And if you ever hike that trail, if you ever stand on that viewing platform, check your watch. If it's 11:11 a.m., if the sound of the waterfall changes from crash to inhale, if you feel that upward pull and hear something calling from behind the water, don't listen. Don't look too closely. Don't let curiosity override survival instinct. Because the thing behind the reversed waterfall isn't evil or malicious. It's just territorial. It's protecting boundaries that were established before humans evolved, maintaining separations that keep our physics stable and their physics contained. And it has very clear rules. You can look once during that brief 111-second window when the door cracks open. But if you try to cross, if you try to enter, you become a messenger carrying warnings in languages you'll never understand. Your entire identity rewritten to serve as a living barrier sign, saying in 1,000 ways that some doors should never be opened, some thresholds should never be crossed, and some questions about why water flows upward should never, ever be answered. Do you believe in coincidence? I used to. I used to think that when nature creates patterns, it's just chaos looking orderly from the right angle. Pareidolia, our brains finding meaning in randomness because that's what human brains do. Then I spent 3 nights at Ruby Beach in November, watching 40-foot driftwood logs arrange themselves into geometric precision, while something offshore responded with lights that don't exist in any terrestrial spectrum. And now I understand that sometimes patterns aren't coincidence. Sometimes they're language. And sometimes, when you witness a conversation between the land and the sea, you realize humans were never supposed to be part of that dialogue. I'm a civil engineer. I specialize in coastal erosion and natural structure analysis. And I'd been hired by the National Park Service to study the driftwood accumulation at Ruby Beach because it was becoming a safety concern. Massive logs, some of them 8 feet in diameter, 60 feet long, weighing several tons, were piling up on the beach in formations that were creating dangerous conditions for tourists. People were climbing on them, getting trapped between them during tide changes. And the Park Service wanted to know if the patterns were stable or if they needed to implement controlled removal. I set up my equipment on November 15th. Survey markers, time-lapse cameras, structural analysis tools, the whole works. Ruby Beach is stunning in that raw Pacific Northwest way. Black sand, sea stacks jutting out of the water like broken teeth, and driftwood everywhere, bleached white by salt and sun, creating these massive skeletal structures that look like the bones of prehistoric creatures. During the day, it's beautiful. At night, it's something else entirely. I was camped on the cliff overlooking the beach, monitoring my time-lapse cameras, when I first noticed something was wrong. This was around 11 p.m., Low tide, moon about 3/4 full. I was reviewing the day's footage, and I noticed that the driftwood configuration had changed since my last survey 6 hours earlier. Not just shifted slightly, completely rearranged. Logs that had been parallel to the waterline were now perpendicular. A pile that had been chaotic was now stacked in precise, alternating layers. And in the center of the beach, 40 or 50 logs had been arranged in a spiral pattern maybe 60 feet across, each log positioned with mathematical precision. I assumed vandalism at first. Teenagers with too much time, some art installation I hadn't been informed about. But when I hiked down to the beach with my flashlight to document the configuration, I realized that was impossible. These weren't small logs. These were multi-ton pieces of old-growth cedar and Sitka spruce, some of them so waterlogged they were barely buoyant. Moving them would require heavy equipment, cranes, winches, multiple vehicles. And there were no tire tracks in the sand, no footprints except the scattered marks of daytime tourists. The logs had been moved, but there was no evidence of how or by whom. I took detailed photographs, measurements, and structural notes. The spiral pattern was perfect. I mean, mathematically perfect, with each log positioned at exactly 23.7 degrees from the previous one, creating a logarithmic spiral that matched natural growth patterns seen in nautilus shells and galaxy formations. The precision was impossible to achieve by accident and difficult to achieve intentionally without surveying equipment. Someone or something had created this, and they'd used mathematical principles that required intelligence and planning. I reported it to the ranger station the next morning. The ranger on duty got this look on his face, this mix of resignation and concern, and asked me what date I'd observed the formation. When I told him November 15th, he pulled out a file, an actual physical file folder, yellowed with age, and showed me photographs. Similar driftwood formations at Ruby Beach, documented in 2003, 1978, and 1952. Always in November, always in spiral patterns, with that same 23.7 degree spacing. Always appearing overnight, with no explanation. "We don't publicize this," he said quietly. "We don't want to encourage people to come looking for it. But every 25 years or so, the driftwood at Ruby Beach does this, arranges itself, and something happens offshore. Something that the Coast Guard investigates and then classifies and then never talks about again." He showed me the Coast Guard reports, heavily redacted, but the basics were there. November 1952. Multiple fishing vessels reported massive bioluminescent display offshore from Ruby Beach. Organized patterns of light moving in formation, something large breaking the surface. November 1978. Commercial shipping reported sonar contact with object too large to be any known marine life, moving in patterns that matched driftwood spiral on beach. November 2003. Navy submarine detected acoustic signals matching no known marine mammal, originating from depth exceeding any recorded biological activity, with signal pattern repeating every 23.7 seconds. "We think it's communication," the ranger said. "We think something offshore is responding to the driftwood patterns, and we think whatever it is has been doing this for a very, very long time." I should have left. Should have told the Park Service this was outside my area of expertise and recommended they contact marine biologists or whoever investigates potential first contact scenarios. But I'm an engineer. I solve structural problems. I analyze patterns. And this was the most fascinating pattern I'd ever encountered. So I stayed. Night 2, November 16th. I set up additional cameras focused on the offshore area, with telephoto lenses and low-light sensors. I wanted to document whatever was creating the bioluminescence, wanted to capture evidence of what was responding to the driftwood signal. Around midnight, the fog rolled in. Thick, wet fog that reduced visibility to maybe 20 feet. I couldn't see the ocean anymore, couldn't see the driftwood formations, could barely see my own equipment. And then the light started. At first, I thought it was phosphorescence in the waves, the natural bioluminescence you sometimes see in ocean water. But these lights were too bright, too organized. They were pulsing in patterns, rapid sequences that repeated every 23.7 seconds, matching the spiral mathematics from the driftwood. And they were moving in formation, multiple light sources coordinating their flashes like synchronized signals. I grabbed my camera and started filming, my hands shaking with excitement and something else. Something that was starting to feel like fear. The fog began to glow, not from reflected light, but from within, like it was charged with electricity. I could see shapes moving through it, massive shapes, whale-sized or larger. But the geometry was wrong. Too many fins, too much symmetry, movements that were too precise to be natural animal behavior. And the sounds, oh God, the sounds. Not whale song, not any marine mammal vocalization I'd ever heard. These were mechanical sounding, rhythmic, with harmonics that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I watched through my telephoto lens as something broke the surface maybe 200 yards offshore. In the camera's view screen, I could see it clearly. Something that looked organic and mechanical at the same time, covered in bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in that same 23.7-second rhythm. It was interacting with the driftwood formation, I realized, responding to it. The light patterns it was producing matched the logarithmic spiral perfectly, like it was confirming receipt of a message. Then it approached the beach. I heard it before I saw it. The sound of something massive dragging itself through shallow water, the scrape of what might have been limbs or appendages against sand and rock. My rational mind was screaming at me to run, to get back to my vehicle and drive away, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, camera still recording, watching as this thing emerged partway from the water and began manipulating the driftwood. It wasn't destroying the formation. It was adding to it. Using appendages I couldn't fully see in the fog-diffused light. It was repositioning logs, adding new ones from the water, refining the spiral pattern with impossible precision. And as it worked, other lights appeared offshore. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all pulsing in synchronization, all responding to whatever message the beach was broadcasting. I don't know how long I watched. Time felt elastic, unreliable. But eventually, the thing in the shallows withdrew back into the ocean. The lights offshore dimmed and faded, and the fog began to dissipate with the approaching dawn. When I could finally see the beach clearly, the driftwood formation had doubled in size and complexity. Not just a spiral anymore, but a three-dimensional structure that looked like it was designed to be viewed from above. From satellite perspective. And in the center, arranged in perfect meter-high letters, a message spelled out in driftwood. 2028. I documented everything. Took photographs, measurements, video footage. Then I hiked down to the beach to examine the formation up close. And that's when I found the other thing. The thing that made me understand this wasn't first contact, because contact had been happening for centuries or longer. Carved into several of the logs were marks. Not natural wear, but deliberate cuts, old and weathered, but still visible. Dates: 1927, 1902, 1877, 1852. Going back as far as the wood preservation would allow, each date exactly 25 years apart, each marking another instance of this phenomenon. The Coast Guard arrived around noon. Helicopter, 3 vessels, and a team of people in uniforms I didn't recognize who confiscated my equipment, my footage, my notes, everything. They were polite but firm, and they had official documentation that made it very clear I was to discuss this with absolutely no one, that my contract with the Park Service was terminated effective immediately, and that any attempt to publish or distribute information about what I'd observed would result in federal prosecution. But they couldn't confiscate my memory, couldn't erase what I'd seen and understood. The driftwood formations at Ruby Beach aren't random. They're not art installations or natural phenomena. They're beacons, signals being constructed by something in the ocean, something that's been communicating with something else for longer than humans have been recording history. And every 25 years, during a window we don't fully understand, the communication intensifies. The message gets clearer, the response gets stronger. 2028 is 3 years away. That's the next window. That's when whatever's been building these patterns, whatever's been responding from offshore, is apparently expecting something significant to happen. And I think about those progressive dates, 1852, 1877, 1902, 1927, 1952, 1978, 2003, and now 2028. Each cycle, the formations get more complex. Each cycle, the offshore response gets larger and more organized. Like something is counting down. Like something is preparing. I've tried to research historical records from those dates. Most are classified or missing, but I found a few fragments. November 1927. Unexplained mass stranding of deep-sea fish species on Olympic Peninsula beaches. Some specimens from depths exceeding 6,000 feet. November 1902. Logging camp near Ruby Beach abandoned overnight. Workers found days later speaking in coordinated phrases they claimed to have heard in dreams. November 1852. Tribal accounts of sky water coming from below, and warnings not to approach the western beaches during the dark moon. Whatever's at Ruby Beach isn't hostile. I want to be clear about that. It never threatened me, never attempted harm. But it's purposeful. It's building towards something. And humans, we're not part of the conversation. We're just witnesses, accidentally present while something vast and patient constructs a message we're not equipped to understand, using mathematics that work across species and possibly across dimensions. The driftwood at Ruby Beach moves itself every 25 years. Something offshore responds. And in 2028, whatever's been counting down for at least 176 years is going to reach zero. I won't be there to see it. The federal government has made very sure I understand the consequences of returning to that beach during November of 2028. But someone will be there. Someone will witness whatever happens when the message is finally complete, and the thing in the deeper water receives the response it's been waiting for. And I hope, I really, genuinely hope, that whatever emerges or arrives or manifests in 2028 maintains the same patient, non-hostile approach it's demonstrated for the last 2 centuries. Because if something that can rearrange multi-ton logs with mathematical precision, that can coordinate bioluminescent displays across miles of ocean, that can influence human perception and behavior enough to keep us away for 176 years, if that something decides humans are no longer acceptable witnesses to its communication, we won't have any defense. We'll just be obstacles between the beach and the water, between the signal and the response, between whatever's building the message and whatever's coming to read it. Ruby Beach is still open to tourists. The Park Service still lists it as one of the most beautiful spots on the Olympic Peninsula. And it is beautiful. During the day. During the months when nothing's responding from offshore. But if you're ever there in November, if you see the driftwood arranged too precisely, If you notice lights offshore that pulse with mathematical rhythm, do what the Quileute people have been doing for centuries. Turn away. Walk back to your car. Leave the beach to whatever's having that conversation. Because some communications aren't meant for human ears, and some messages aren't addressed to our species at all. You ever drive across a bridge at night and feel like you're crossing more than just water? Like there's a threshold there, an invisible line between the world you left and the world you're entering. And for those few seconds, while you're suspended over darkness, you don't quite belong to either side. The Wishkah River Bridge in Aberdeen feels like that even during the day. Old steel and concrete spanning black water, industrial port smells mixing with rain, the kind of infrastructure that's been there so long it's become part of the landscape's bones. But at 4:13 a.m. on November 22nd, I learned that some bridges don't just span water, they span time. And some accidents don't just happen once. They keep happening over and over. To anyone unlucky enough to be in the wrong place when history decides to replay itself. I'm a long-haul trucker. Been driving commercially for 12 years, and I thought I knew every weird thing highways could throw at me. Fog banks that appear from nowhere, animals that shouldn't exist in certain regions, that specific kind of fatigue that makes you question whether the last 50 miles actually happened or if you dreamed them. But I'd never experienced temporal overlap. Never had my present and someone else's past occupy the same space at the same time. Never felt myself die in someone else's body while my own body kept driving. The Wishkah River Bridge taught me that death doesn't always stay in the past. And some final moments are so powerful, so traumatic, that they imprint on location like a recording that plays back at specific times, whether anyone's there to witness it or not. I was running a delivery from Seattle to Coos Bay. Medical equipment that needed to arrive by 7 a.m., which meant driving through the night. I'd done the route dozens of times, knew every curve and grade, and Aberdeen was just another pass-through, another small logging town, sleeping while I rolled through in the pre-dawn darkness. The highway was empty, not unusual for 4 a.m. on a weekday. And I was making good time, listening to a podcast about unexplained phenomena, ironically enough, when I crossed the city limits into Aberdeen. The rain started exactly as I approached the Wishkah River Bridge. Not gradually. 1 second the road was dry, the next second I was driving through a downpour so heavy my wipers couldn't keep up. And it was cold rain, the kind that turns to ice on contact with cold surfaces. And I felt my rig shudder slightly as the tires lost friction. I slowed down, checked my mirrors, adjusted my following distance even though there was nobody behind me, doing everything by the book because ice and 18-wheelers are a combination that demands respect. My CB radio crackled to life. Static first, then a voice, distant and broken. "Bridge, 413, he's coming. Wrong lane. Watch the..." More static, then silence. I tried to respond, asked for clarification, but got nothing. Probably someone miles away, signal bouncing weird off the atmosphere, nothing to worry about. But something about that voice, about the urgency in those fragmented words, made my skin prickle. I checked my dashboard clock, 4:11 a.m. 2 minutes until whatever the voice was warning about. I was approaching the bridge now, my headlights catching the steel girders, the reflective lane markers, the black water below visible through gaps in the structure. Everything looked normal. Empty road, no traffic, just me in the rain and the bridge ahead. At exactly 4:13 a.m., I saw the headlights. They appeared in my lane, not gradually approaching from the distance, but suddenly there, maybe 200 yards ahead, bright and high like another semi-truck, coming straight at me at highway speed. No time to think. only time to react. I yanked the wheel right, felt my trailer start to jackknife, heard the air brakes screaming, and I was going to hit the bridge railing, going to punch through and drop into the Wishkah River. And in that split second before impact, I saw the other truck clearly. It was a logging truck. Old style, 1970s cab, long hood, chrome stacks, and the driver was visible through the windshield. Middle-aged man. Terrified expression, mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear, and his hands were jerking the wheel back and forth like he'd lost control, like his truck was already in the skid that would kill him. Then it hit me. Not physically hit me, passed through me. The other truck drove through my truck like we were both ghosts, and in the half-second of overlap, everything changed. I wasn't in my truck anymore. I was in his truck, in his body, experiencing his accident from the inside, and I could feel everything. The fatigue, God, the bone-deep fatigue of someone who'd been driving for 20 hours straight, fighting to stay awake, eyes burning, the physical sensation of micro-sleeps. Those tiny gaps in consciousness that you don't even notice until it's too late. The cold, not from weather, but from adrenaline. From the horrible understanding that you've made a mistake you can't take back. The wheel in my hands was too light. The feedback was wrong, and I was overcorrecting, yanking it right to avoid hitting something. But the trailer was sliding on ice, physics taking over, momentum that couldn't be stopped. I felt the bridge railing hit. Felt the metal give way, felt the horrible lurch as the trailer pulled the cab sideways and then over. Felt the brief weightlessness of falling. And I was screaming, trying to tell myself this wasn't real, wasn't happening to me. But every nerve in my body was experiencing it as absolute reality. The impact with water was crushing. Cold, darkness flooding in through windows that shattered, and I was trying to get my seatbelt off, trying to reach the surface. But the cab was sinking fast, and I couldn't find the release. And the water was so cold, it felt like being stabbed with ice picks all over my body. I drowned. I felt myself drown, felt my lungs fill with river water, felt the panic give way to involuntary gasping, felt consciousness fading as oxygen deprivation shut down my brain. And the last thing I experienced was the horrible regret. The knowledge that I'd killed myself through carelessness, through pushing too hard, through thinking I could make just one more run without sleep. Then I was back in my own truck, on the other side of the bridge, stopped half on the shoulder with my hazard lights flashing. My hands were locked on the steering wheel. My face was wet. From sweat or tears, I couldn't tell. And my lungs were burning like I'd been holding my breath. The dashboard clock said 4:15 a.m. 2 minutes. I'd lost 2 minutes. And in that gap, I'd died in someone else's body, experienced someone else's final moments so completely that part of me still believed I was at the bottom of the Wishkah River, trapped in a 1970s logging truck cab, waiting for recovery teams that would take days to find me. I pulled over completely, put my rig in park, and sat there shaking for 20 minutes before I could even think about continuing the drive. My CB was still crackling with static, and I could hear fragments of voices, different voices, multiple transmissions overlapping. Watch the ice, lost control, can't stop, bridge railing giving way. They were all describing the same accident from different perspectives, different years maybe, all of them trapped in that 4:13 a.m. window, replaying their deaths over and over. I radioed dispatch when I could finally form words. Told them I needed to report an accident, then had to explain there was no accident, not now, not one I could see evidence of. The dispatcher was confused until I mentioned the Wishkah River Bridge at 4:13 a.m., and then she got very quiet. "You saw the logging truck?" she said. Not a question, a statement. You're not the first driver to report that. We've had 17 incident reports from that bridge, all at 4:13 a.m., all describing a logging truck in the wrong lane. She transferred me to a supervisor who told me what the company knew, what they documented but didn't officially acknowledge. December 3rd, 1977. A logging truck driver fell asleep at the wheel crossing the Wishkah River Bridge at 4:13 a.m. Overcorrected when he jerked awake. Lost control on icy roads, crashed through the bridge railing, and sank in 40 feet of black water. His name was listed on the accident report she read me. I'm not going to share it because it feels like a violation, like I've already intruded enough on his final moments. But she said drivers have been experiencing his accident ever since. Seeing his truck, feeling the impact, sometimes, like me, living through his death from the inside. Why? I asked. Why does it keep happening? Why can't he rest? She didn't have an answer. Nobody does. But she said the pattern is consistent. Drivers who are fatigued, who are pushing themselves too hard, who are in a similar mental state to what he must have been in. They're the ones who experience the full phenomenon. Like his death is a warning. A message from 1977 saying, "This is what happens when you drive exhausted. This is what the last seconds feel like. This is the price of pushing just a little bit further." I made my delivery to Quinault Bay 3 hours late. Told my dispatcher I needed time off, needed to process what happened. She approved it without question. Apparently, every driver who experiences the Wishkah River Bridge phenomenon needs recovery time, needs space to remember that they're alive, that the drowning they felt wasn't real, that they made it across when someone else didn't. But here's what haunts me, what keeps me awake even though I'm not driving anymore. In those 2 minutes when I was him, when I was experiencing his death, I felt his regret. Not just about falling asleep, not just about the accident, but deeper regret. Missed moments with family, conversations he'd put off, the assumption that there would always be more time. And I felt his desperation to communicate, to warn, to make his death mean something by preventing other deaths. I think that's why he's still there. I think his final moments were so powerful, his desire to warn others so intense, that he imprinted himself on that bridge, turned his death into a teaching moment that replays for anyone who needs to learn the lesson he learned too late. He's not a ghost in the traditional sense. He's a message, a warning, a moment of pure, concentrated consequence that exists outside normal time, waiting at 4:13 a.m. for drivers who are making the same mistakes he made. I drive different now. I stop when I'm tired. I pull over when I feel that microsleep starting. I turn down loads that would require pushing too hard, driving too long, cutting safety margins too thin. Because I've felt what happens when you don't. And I've experienced firsthand that death isn't always an ending. Sometimes it's a loop, a moment repeated infinitely. A final lesson that teaches itself over and over to anyone who needs to learn it. The Wishkah River Bridge is still there. The ice still forms on cold November nights. And at 4:13 a.m., if you're crossing that bridge while exhausted, while pushing yourself past safe limits, you might see headlights in your lane. You might feel the impact that isn't happening to you, but happened to someone else 47 years ago. And you might, if the phenomenon decides you need the full lesson, experience those 2 minutes of drowning, of regret, of understanding too late that no delivery is worth dying for. If that happens to you, if you find yourself suddenly on the other side of the bridge with lost time and the memory of water in your lungs, do what I did. Pull over, Stop driving. Call someone who cares about you and tell them you're alive. Because the man in the logging truck didn't get that chance. And his final gift, terrible and traumatic as it is making sure you do. What do you think keeps a tree alive when it has no ground beneath it? I'm talking about a real tree, a full-grown Sitka spruce with a trunk thick as a car. Roots that should be anchored in soil, but instead hang suspended over a 15-foot cavity carved out by erosion, reaching into nothing but air and gravity that should have pulled it down decades ago. The tree of life at Kalaloch Beach defies every principle of botany and physics. And on December 1st, during a Pacific winter storm, I learned why it's still standing. I learned what it's connected to. And I learned that some things that look like trees, that have bark and branches and roots, aren't really trees at all. There's something else wearing a tree's shape, and they've been here much, much longer than the forests around them. I'm a storm photographer. I chase extreme weather for a living. Hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, anything that pushes nature to its violent limits. The Pacific Northwest winter storms are some of the best conditions for dramatic coastal shots, and the tree of life at Kalaloch Beach is legendary in photography circles. This impossible tree clinging to a cliff face, roots exposed and reaching, waves crashing below. It's the kind of image that defines a career. I'd been planning the shoot for months, waiting for the perfect storm, and December 1st delivered 60 mph winds, 20-foot waves, and a storm surge that would bring the ocean right up to the tree's exposed root system. I arrived at Kalaloch around 9 p.m. The beach access was officially closed, but I had permits for extreme weather documentation. And I knew the rangers wouldn't be patrolling in conditions this severe. The wind hit me the moment I got out of my vehicle. Salt spray and rain so hard, it felt like being sandblasted. Perfect. I loaded my gear and hiked down to the beach, my headlamp barely penetrating the darkness and horizontal rain. The tree of life sits on a cliff between Beach 4 and Beach 5. And even in daylight, it's unsettling, this massive tree whose entire root system is visible. A hollow cavity beneath it, where the ocean has eroded all the soil away. And somehow it just keeps growing. At night, during a storm, it looked alive in a way trees aren't supposed to look alive. The roots were moving, not swaying in the wind, moving independently, reaching, flexing like tentacles or fingers searching for something. I told myself it was the wind, the rain. My exhausted eyes playing tricks after a 6-hour drive. But when I set up my camera and looked through the telephoto lens, there was no denying what I was seeing. The roots were growing, visibly growing, extending toward the water. And they were glowing faintly with some kind of bioluminescence, pale blue-green light pulsing through the root structure in waves. I started shooting. This was it, the career-defining shot I'd been chasing. Extreme weather, impossible subject, and some kind of natural bioluminescence I'd never heard of in trees. My camera was firing continuously, capturing the roots moving, the waves crashing, the storm intensifying. And I was so focused on getting the perfect exposure that I almost didn't notice the ocean was responding. The waves were changing pattern. Instead of the chaotic crash of storm surge, they were organizing, coming in rhythmic sets that matched the pulse of light in the tree's roots. And in the wave crests, visible even through the rain and darkness, there was bioluminescence. Not the scattered pinpoint light of plankton, but concentrated sources. Large shapes moving in formation beneath the surface, coming closer with each wave. The tree's roots extended into the water. I watched through my camera as they stretched impossibly long, reaching past the cliff edge, past the beach, into the surf zone where they disappeared beneath the waves. And something down there grabbed them. I saw it happen. Saw massive shapes break the surface briefly, whale-sized or larger, covered in the same bioluminescent patterns as the tree roots, and they wrapped around the roots like they were shaking hands, like they were making contact after a long separation. The wind stopped, just stopped, mid-gust, like someone had flipped a switch. The rain continued, but the wind died completely, and in that sudden terrible silence, I could hear the tree. It was making sounds, not creaking wood sounds, not wind through branches, but something else. Deep, resonant tones that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. Frequencies that made my vision blur and my teeth ache and my thoughts scatter. I looked up at the tree's canopy and saw the branches were moving wrong. They weren't bending in wind or rain. They were reconfiguring, rotating, adjusting their angles with mechanical precision like a satellite dish orienting toward a signal. And the trunk was doing something impossible. It was showing images. The bark was displaying moving pictures, bioluminescent patterns that formed recognizable shapes. Deep ocean trenches, underwater structures that looked geometric and intentional, creatures that weren't fish or whales, but something else entirely, and star fields that didn't match any sky I'd ever seen. That's when I understood. The tree of life isn't a tree. It's an antenna, a receiver, a biological structure that's been standing in this exact spot for who knows how long, maintaining contact between whatever lives in the deep ocean and something else, something that comes from wherever those wrong star fields exist. The erosion that exposed its roots wasn't natural deterioration. It was intentional exposure, the tree revealing its connection points, making its purpose visible. I should have run. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to get back to my vehicle and drive away and never think about what I was seeing. But I couldn't move. The tree had noticed me. I felt its awareness like pressure inside my skull. And the images on its trunk changed. Now they were showing me. Showing my life, my memories, displaying moments from my past on its bark in perfect detail. Moments I'd forgotten, moments that should be private, inaccessible. It was reading me, scanning me, understanding what I was. The roots that had extended into the ocean began pulling back. And they weren't empty. Something was coming up with them. Something that had attached itself to the root system, climbing toward shore. I could see it in brief flashes when waves surged, massive tentacled forms covered in barnacles and scales and structures that didn't belong to any known marine life. Pulling themselves up the roots toward the tree, toward the beach, toward me. I tried to run then. Tried to grab my camera and equipment and get away. But I couldn't move my legs. I looked down and saw roots, thin, hair-like roots, growing out of the sand around my feet, wrapping around my ankles, my calves, connecting me to the beach, to the tree, to whatever network I'd stumbled into. And I could feel it. Feel the tree's consciousness, alien and vast. And through the tree, I could feel what was in the ocean, what was climbing up the roots, and beyond that, impossibly distant, whatever the tree was communicating with in those spaces where the stars were wrong. I was drowning in information. Geological time flowing through my mind, seeing the continents drift, seeing ice ages come and go, seeing the tree standing in this exact spot through thousands of years of human history, always watching, always communicating, always maintaining the connection between ocean depths and cosmic depths. I saw what lives down there, in the Hadal zones beyond where any human has explored. things that existed before complex life on land, things that have been patient and aware and waiting. And I saw what they're waiting for. Some celestial alignment, some configuration of stars and tides and planetary positions that happens rarely, that's coming soon. The roots released me. Just let go. I fell backward onto the sand, and when I looked up, the tree was normal again. No bioluminescence, no moving roots, no images on the bark. Just a tree hanging impossibly over a cavity in the rain. In the storm that had resumed its chaos as if it had never stopped. The things climbing from the ocean were gone. The awareness that had been pressing inside my skull was gone. But I was changed. I found my camera in the sand, salt water and rain, having destroyed it completely. No photos, no evidence. Nothing but my memory of what I'd seen, and the knowledge that I'd been scanned, catalogued, and judged by something that wears the shape of a tree, but thinks in frequencies humans can't process and maintains connections across distances our physics can't measure. I drove away from Kalaloch at 3 a.m., my hands shaking so badly I could barely control the steering wheel. When I got home and finally slept, I dreamed in images I didn't understand. Geometric structures underwater, mathematical formulas I've never learned. Star charts of constellations that don't exist in our galaxy. And when I woke up, I could still feel it. The tree's awareness, the ocean's awareness, the knowledge that I'd been marked as observed, that somewhere in whatever vast network connects the tree of life to the deep and the deep to the cosmic beyond. There's a record of me now. I've tried to research the tree. Historical records, geological surveys, anything that explains why it exists, how long it's been there. Most records say it's a natural formation, 50 to 75 years old, slowly dying from exposure. But I found one account from a Quinault elder interviewed in 1923 who mentioned the watching tree at the beach that bends between worlds, and said it had stood in the same spot since before her grandfather's grandfather's time, which would make it at least 300 years old. She said approaching it during storms was forbidden, that the tree speaks to what lives in the midnight water, and what comes when it calls is not for human eyes. The tree is still there, still growing despite having no soil, still reaching toward something with roots that suspend in open air. And every winter, during the worst Pacific storms, there are reports of strange lights offshore from Kalaloch, of sounds that aren't quite whale song, of waves that move in patterns that don't match weather predictions. The Park Service doesn't comment on these reports. They just quietly close beach access during major storms and post warnings about cliff erosion danger. But it's not erosion they're worried about. It's contact. Because the tree of life is doing what it's always done. What it will keep doing until the stars align right and the things in the deep get whatever signal they've been waiting centuries or millennia to receive. And when that happens, when the connection is complete and the communication finishes, and whatever's been dormant in the Hadal zones decides it's time to surface, that tree will be the anchor point, the beacon, the bridge between their world and ours. I still do storm photography, but I won't go back to Kalaloch, won't photograph that tree again. Because once you've felt its awareness, once you've been scanned and catalogued and marked as a witness, you understand that some natural wonders aren't meant to be captured or explained or appreciated. They're meant to be warnings. Signs at the threshold saying clearly that you're standing at the edge of something vast and patient and utterly indifferent to human existence. The tree of life grows without ground because it's rooted in something deeper than soil. It reaches toward something further than sky. And it remembers every person who stood beneath it, who's looked too close, who's witnessed what happens when it extends its roots into storm-dark water and pulls something ancient and aware up toward the surface. It remembers me. And I think, sometimes, when I'm near the ocean, when the wind carries that specific salt smell and the sound of distant waves, I can feel it remembering. Reaching across miles, maintaining connection, keeping track of everyone who knows what it really is. That's the thing about the Olympic Peninsula. About this whole 329-mile loop of rainforest and mountain and coastline. It's not that it's haunted. It's that it's aware. Every stop along this route, every location where something impossible happens, they're all connected somehow. All part of something larger that we're just beginning to glimpse. And the tree of life isn't an end point. It's a beginning. The place where everything the peninsula has been preparing, everything the deep has been reaching toward, will finally surface when the time is right. I don't know when that will be. But the tree knows. And it's still growing, still reaching, still waiting with patience that measures time in centuries, in geological epochs, in stellar cycles beyond human comprehension. Still waiting to complete the connection it's been maintaining since before humans walked these shores. And when it does, everyone who's been marked, everyone who's witnessed something along this haunted loop, will feel it. We'll know. And we'll understand, too late, that we were never the observers. We were always the observed.